Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending. My name is John Hugill. I'm a Deloitte principal in our human services practice, and I'm here to talk to you about the project that we did with the state of Tennessee. So I'll let my colleague from the state introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, John. Anthony Burwell, IT Director at the Tennessee Department of Human Services. I manage the infrastructure and operation groups.
So I served as the project director on our project working with the Department of Human Services to transform their 30-year-old legacy computer associated CA generated COBOL system to Java. And during this project, we're going to go through a little bit about how we did it. But even during the project, we also had several other opportunities to modernize and migrate. And Anthony will spend a little bit of time during the presentation today talking about the move that they did to go from on-prem to cloud, and AWS in particular, so that's here at the conference. In terms of what we're going to cover today, we'll spend a little bit of time around why the client was really focused on this particular change and what they were trying to accomplish and the rationale for migrating and modernizing the way that they did. We're going to talk a little bit about the solution that we proposed and that was accepted and that we executed on. And then we're going to get into some metrics around what was actually done, what was the size and scale of what we accomplished on this program of work. Then Anthony's going to take us through the infrastructure on AWS that supports this new migrated application and get into some of the tools that we use. And we've left some time at the end for questions and answers, so feel free to pepper us when we get to that point of the presentation. So a little background around the client. So Department of Human Services handles several different programs, but one of them is their child support program. Every state has a statewide child support program and statewide child support system. Tennessee's has been live, their legacy system had been live since 1996. So a very established application. It had to go through a certification process with the Federal Office of Child Support. And that was one of the main drivers for why they wanted to migrate and re-platform their application rather than other options like a new system build or a rip and replace transfer system from another state. They chose strategically to do a re-platforming of their system. And one reason is that that certification process can be pretty challenging. And if you go through a re-platforming exercise, rather than a new system build, you are effectively grandfathered in with the Federal Office of Child Support. So that was one driver, but that probably was not the biggest driver for change of why that they decided to do what they did. The other kind of reason why they chose to migrate in the way that they did was really around the fact that these rules had been kind of proven over decades. So they had been refining this application, maintaining and supporting it, but they knew for a long time actually that the platform that they were on was not sustainable. It was very, CA-Gen, COBOL generated solution was not something that was really prevalent in the marketplace. So getting resources to support it and enhance it, the ability to actually leverage other modern tools and products and integrate it with that technology platform was not really available to them. So all those things together combined for a solution where they said, we want to refactor or re-platform our legacy solution and bring that functional equivalence, that one-for-one, into a new modern platform. So Java on Linux was what we ended up doing. They had other choices that they could have gone with. We could have looked at the .NET approach, but Java was their standard, and that's what we went with. And I'll talk a little bit about that platform and how we go through that with an automated tool set. So for those of you that aren't familiar with automated refactoring, it's a set of tools and automation that allows the legacy code base to be migrated into a new modern platform. So that's the code, that's the user experience, the UI, and it's also the data in the database. When we started the project, initially it was just going to be an on-prem deployment of their legacy solution to the new re-platform solution also on-prem. In fact, at the very beginning of the project, we weren't even going to touch the database. The database was going to stay on the mainframe. Now, a lot of the drivers for change and what the client was looking to accomplish really drove them to make some changes along the way, and the first one was to bring the database into the discussion and how we get the application and the data and their data sets all off the mainframe, looking to get away from that mainframe environment in totality. The tool set also, because it's automated, it really allows for more repeatability, more flexibility, and also more maintainability. Because we're leveraging the assets that the client has been working with for decades, when we replatform it, it's in a form and it's familiar to their technical team that it allows that maintainability to continue into the future, even on the new tools that the client would now be using to support the replatform system. I mentioned around flexibility. One of the benefits of the approach that we took with refactoring and the way we did is we had a very small actual code freeze. So this allowed the client to continue to maintain and operate their legacy solution and even change and enhance that legacy solution up until we started our user acceptance test phase when we locked down. Some other clients, you could actually even go with an even shorter code freeze period of time. So with that, the benefit of this is that as they're making these changes to their legacy system, they're all getting incorporated through the refactoring process and that automated toolkit and ends up in the new replatform system when we run it. So we're running these sequences of the tools over and over and over again and refining the tools, but not refining the code, not touching the code by hand. So that's a real benefit to this approach because it allowed the client to continue their operations. It allowed the technology team that supports the application to continue to support that system, but also learn about the new tools and the new system processes and products that we're going to be using as we go through the project. So it was really flexible in terms of their ability to manage the existing workload and also then support the project itself to replatform the system. The last piece I'll talk about is around data and database. So when we looked at the data and migrating the data, the database schema, the data itself does not change through this process. DB2 was running ZOS on the mainframe. We're now running DB2 on Linux. And Anthony will talk a little bit about how we get to AWS at the end of the day and some of the rationale for that. But that's also part of the migration processes on the data side of things. So when we look at the size and the scale of this application, and I mentioned now we're running in AWS Cloud, this was the first real mission critical application for the human services programs in Tennessee, and actually for government in Tennessee as a whole that got migrated to AWS and to cloud technology. You can see from the slide the size and scale of the application. These are large systems, they're very complex. The benefit of the approach, as I said, is around the fact that these business rules that have been refined and optimized and that the client has trust that they execute their business continue to operate in the new world and in the new environment. But these are significant systems, nearly 400 online screens, nearly 700 batch jobs, and all of those migrate over into the new world running Java on DB2 on Linux. The interesting thing about this is when we refactor, replatform the solution, it is running in a very similar way to how it ran in the legacy world on the mainframe. Part of that benefit comes up in the go live. So we went live 4th of July weekend, so not even 5 months ago. Since we went live and through this process, it was a very smooth go live. So almost immediately the client is starting to think about ways to modernize and enhance the application, not continue to run it the way they've been running it for years. Compare that to a client organization that would choose a new system build approach or a transfer system from another state government where you're in the code, you're making changes, you're delivering new business rules, you have more challenges around deployment and implementation. They're focused on firefighting and making sure that they're stabilizing that new system in the days immediately, days, weeks, months immediately after a go live. In our world, within a month, probably 3 weeks, the client was already thinking about ways to start doing what I call small M modernization projects that are compact, they're digestible, they can be fit and sized to the demand that the client and the business organization has, and that their technology team can support. So they get more into a regular cadence around modernizing and enhancing. So the accomplishments that I list here are really that move that occurred in July. But now what's happening even since that go live is we're delivering new enhancements, we're delivering new features. The client is starting to focus around rethinking batch, rethinking reporting, rethinking how they're going to execute their online and their UI for their users and their user experience. They start to do things like focus on more customer self-service approaches that they couldn't do in their legacy technology. All of that became possible because of the modernization that they effectively had to do. Now they're doing the modernizations that they want to do because they're on that new platform. This might be a good time to talk a little bit about
Sure.
how AWS came into the
Yeah, thanks,
equation.
John. So for the last bullet here, let me speak on that. So for not only was a code refactor, but we also had to refactor the authorization that was happening on the mainframe. So on the mainframe, we were using IBM RACF for authorization, which provided the unique access to screens for all of our users. So with our identity and access management tool, we were able to refactor that as well and refit it for a new authorization solution for the cloud.
Well, it brings up a good point as well, because while the automated refactoring process is really looking to do a functional equivalence, one for one, what the legacy system was doing to the new system running on the new platform, there are some inevitable changes that need to occur. Address validation was one. There are third-party products that need to be integrated and validated through that process. But by keeping those to a minimum, it makes the degree of difficulty of what we're trying to execute a lot lower than some of those other projects that I mentioned. But it is an important factor. The piece that's not on here, obviously the amount of lines of code and data are pretty impressive in terms of what was accomplished. But the driver around interface partners, so these programs, these human services systems that we work with have a lot of data exchanges, federal partners, commercial partners, lots of data coming in and out. By doing the approach that we did on this project to get the modernization completed in a way that allows the client to then start focus on incremental modernization activities, it allowed all of those partners to not have to make any changes to their systems and to those interfaces. So that's very high complexity around a new system build, is working with the interface partners, coordinating how all of them are going to be able to be tested and validated. Through the approach that we took, it effectively was seamless to every one of those interface partners, and those interfaces worked day one without an issue.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, John. Let's dive into the infrastructure on AWS, right? So our journey to the cloud. So this comes as no shocker, I'm sure, to many, but to our folks in Tennessee and also our federal partners, security was a major concern. You're going where? To the cloud. How are you going to secure it? So we'll talk a little bit about that later, but there are two things that we had to establish on our journey to the cloud. We first had to establish our connectivity back to our state of Tennessee core services. So we established an AT&T NetBond, or in other words, an AWS Direct Connect solution with partners from AT&T and also Deloitte to establish that connectivity. Things that we need on-prem are Active Directory, our IP addressing scheme, DNS, et cetera. So we had to make sure that we had this connectivity back home to the state of Tennessee. Second, we were coming from the IBM data center in Boulder, so we needed a secure connection to get our data from the IBM data center to our AWS tenant. So for that, I also work with IBM and our Deloitte partner to create a VPN tunnel for that secure connection. Let's dive into the reference architecture. This is a lot. We will work through it. So let's start at where I just led off here. So the direct connect here. So if you see it there, the direct connect to your far left, you see that dotted line that goes to the transit gateway. That's key. Those that know what the transit gateway is for AWS, it's the central security component. I'm going to mention it a few more times. That's key. We want everything going through the transit gateway. It acts as our hub for all things security. To the left of that, we have our security VPC. And as I talk through this, you'll see that what we've done here is not only have we refactored the code, but we've also created this modular and separated component environment in our tenant for future expansion. So in our security VPC, we have our Palo Alto firewalls. You'll notice that we are spanned across 2 availability zones. You'll see this trend as we go on. Let's go up to our top left. We have our enterprise service bus. That's where our OpenShift and our API services live. To the right of that, we have our shared services VPC, some of those tools that John mentioned, like address validation, and also our CAGN, our managed file transfer, lives in this VPC. We're going to skip over the managed service VPC and the application VPC and jump down to the bottom right to our application level VPC. So here's where our DevOps stack lives. We're running a suite of tools for pushing code to various components, and I won't give a DevOps speech. We don't have that kind of time. To the left, we have our enterprise security VPC. This is where our identity and access management solution lives. We are using ForgeRock as a tool, but I'll say it later, we're also using AWS IAM for another specific purpose. As you can see, everything goes back to the transit gateway. That's key, that's what we wanted, that's by design. Let's zone in now on the managed services VPC. We have our Bastion host for our admins that need to jump in and get to different components for administrative purposes. We're using Active Directory for our LDAP for the local instances, Centrify for our privileged access management solution. We're using Splunk for our infrastructure monitoring as well as our system logging, McAfee for our antivirus, Tenable to satisfy our federal partners for vulnerability scanning, and of course we have our root CA server for certificates. Again, same trend, 2 availability zones, we're spreading this across. Going down to our applications VPC, this is where TSYS lives, our child support solution. Of course, on the application side are our web and application servers, and the DB2 database, as John mentioned, is also here. Spread across 2 availability zones, set up for high availability. To the left, we're using AWS Elastic Load Balancer so that we can balance the traffic that's coming in through the gateway. Back to security. Security considerations on AWS. One key point not listed here is that we are in the AWS consumer cloud. We are not in GovCloud. We are in consumer cloud. Our federal partners require that we are FedRAMP moderate, and the consumer cloud is. So we're good there on the public cloud. The security component that I talked about in the reference architecture, the transit gateway and the Palo Alto, that component is spread across all managed service VPCs. Next, our data in transit is encrypted using VPN tunnels in TLS 1.2, which is also not only a federal requirement, but also a state requirement. And last, our data at rest is always encrypted using AES 256-bit encryption. And we also have customer managed keys that are created where we, the state of Tennessee, have access to those keys securely ourselves so that our other partners and other vendors are not susceptible to having access to unlock the data. The next 3 slides will jump into a lot of tools Of course, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into all of these. You can certainly sign up at a lot of courses if you want to learn more about this stuff. But going down the controls list, for our access controls, we're using AWS IAM and Microsoft Active Directory. Again, that's set up for the purpose of access to the AWS console and also access to our local servers. For identification and authentication, we're using KMS, I just spoke about that. Centrify and also Microsoft MFA for dual factor authentication. For risk assessment, we're running our Tenable and Nessa scans. Again, I can't say this enough, this is satisfying our federal partners. They require that we run these monthly vulnerability scans and that we address those critical and high issues as they may come about. For our DAST and SAST needs, we're using Micro Focus Fortify and Web Inspect. And for audit and accountability, of course, the native logging of CloudTrail and CloudWatch is there. We're using Splunk as an enterprise solution. However, let me say this, all of the logging from CloudTrail and CloudWatch is going to Splunk. So all of our application logging, all of the AWS logging is all being managed in an aggregate fashion over in Splunk. For system and information integrity, more Amazon tools, CloudTrail, CloudWatch, AWS Systems Manager, Splunk, McAfee, Antivirus, which we're using as an agentless solution, and of course our Palo Alto firewalls. Again, this is our security posture, this is our setup, this is what we're going with. To round it out here, our system and communication protection, we're using AWS Shield just for extra DDoS protection. We're using AWS KMS, our transit gateway, security groups, Palo Alto firewall. And of course, one of the most important reasons we're excited about being in Amazon, we are in year 2, by the way, of our cloud journey, is the beauty of Amazon, right? The ability to use AMIs in CloudFormation to provide instances and access to services quicker.
I think this is probably a good point
Yep.
in order to kind of bring up, you mentioned a 2-year cloud journey,
Yep.
right? But this is the first of the state systems that's actually made it to the cloud in terms of a mission critical system, not a software as a service type, smaller application.
True.
Talk about how that kind of came to be, because I mentioned earlier when we started the project, we didn't even have database migration in the scope. That came on board after we started the application process and the application refactoring process. But then the decision was made to go to AWS and cloud.
Sure, yeah. So we started off on-prem within the state of Tennessee data centers. We started on-prem with the TSIS solution. At some point, the needs outweighed the capabilities and what was available at our data centers. We needed more space, we needed more environments, and decisions were made for us to journey to the cloud. So it was a no-brainer at some point. We did not want the state of Tennessee to make a huge investment in their infrastructure for this one project, so it made sense that we journey to the cloud.
Well, I talked about flexibility being one of the benefits of the approach that we took on the application side, but we saw similar benefits on the AWS side. A good example of that was when we went live, or in the run-up to going live in July, a decision was made to quickly set up a contact center, call center to support any user queries that might come in with the new replatform application going live. We were able to leverage AWS Connect and set that up very quickly. So that wasn't one of the tools that Anthony described, but because we were in the cloud, because we were leveraging AWS product and environments, we were able to leverage that one in particular to fill a short-term need, and it turned out to be a very short-term need.
It was.
Thankfully, when we went live.
Yeah, yeah. Rounding it out here, our contingency planning, of course, our disaster recovery, we have VFS and not mentioned here EBS snapshots that are being backed up for us on a routine schedule, which gives us the ability to recover, to meet our RTO, recovery time, and recovery point objectives for DR purposes.
So the other piece I wanted to mention is we started this project in early summer of 2019. So roughly a year later, the pandemic hit, and we went completely remote during this project. So obviously, Anthony and I are here. We have the pleasure of speaking to you all about the success of this program and what was accomplished, and how we got through those challenges and delivered the solution for the business. There are a lot of people from the client's business organization that need thanks as well for that effort, and they've been great partners throughout the project. Worked diligently with them through all the different changes that we were adding on and augmenting to the project as we were delivering over time, and then got thrown the curveball around going completely remote for the last year plus of delivering the solution in July. We continue to be effectively delivering remote, although some of that is starting to change now. I'll actually be making a trip to Nashville to see my client next week. So, and it's funny because when I got here to the conference, I ran into Anthony at the expo, and I had not seen him since March of 2020. But it was just a testament to the kind of world that we're in and the tools that are now available to support us in kind of remote delivery exercises, because our schedule didn't change because of being remote. That took a lot of time, effort, energy, and work on all the parts of the parties, the human services client, the business client. They were doing their testing effectively remote. Our team was effective. We had a strong studio team in Austin, Texas that delivered a lot of it, but we had an on-prem team that was working with the client up until March of 2020. And we then effectively all went virtual. But it was really, it was a labor of love. It was, I've been at Deloitte for 30 years, and there's never been a time during my tenure with the firm that I haven't had at least one child support client that I've been serving. So focus on human services. A lot of those human services systems interact with each other and interface with each other. But this was definitely a very special project, because honestly, it was my first automated refactoring project. So as a firm, we have a lot of experience delivering these. I was bringing the child support market offering expertise to the project team and to the client. But I couldn't say better things about our team that delivered the tools and the technology that helped us deliver a new child support system to the state of Tennessee.
Along our journey, we had to make decisions on partners, and we are more than pleased of our decision in making Deloitte our partner. They know the cloud. They helped us get here. A lot of these tools that I just went over in these last couple of slides was a crosswalk of in a sense, right? We were doing things on the mainframe, and we needed a substitute or replacement for them in the cloud. So a key takeaway that we have here is just to take advantage, right? Take advantage of the AWS services, take advantage of what's there, and it can make the journey a lot easier. Sometimes, it may not fit, and your organization may already have a practice around a third-party tool, but still, bringing that tool to the cloud is effective, and it can work. So, but we appreciate the partnership with Deloitte, and the Deloitte D Cloud team has been is still helping us, and is very good for us and helped us be a success.
It's been a great experience. I think maybe for some of the other applications at the department, that obviously cloud is now the preferred deployment choice for those applications.
It is, yeah. We are, if there's some phrase for beyond cloud first, that's where we are, right? So we are moving everything to the cloud. We are on a modernization journey, and so the reference architecture in 4 slides ago is the base foundation for what we're going to build everything on. The separate virtual private clouds is what we're going to use to expand our modernization and reach our goal.
The different programs of work that are going on at the department now, this was the only one that was an automated refactoring project. A lot of the others were some of the other techniques around either new system build or a deployment of an additional, effectively a transfer system from another government entity. But again, on the infrastructure side, that consistency, I think there are things I think that were built and learned from the deployment of the Tennessee child support application that are now going to benefit those other programs as well. And there'll continue to be efficiencies and enterprise level solutions that will drive costs down. But, you know, I talked to Anthony earlier, and one of the things he said is that, you know, don't lead with the cost savings. That's not the reason why, or not the primary reason why.
Yeah, that's true.
But in terms of kind of where we go now, I mentioned that this program of work was really the modernization that the client was really compelled to do because of where they were in their life cycle with their legacy solution. Really now, it's funny, I haven't worked with a client before where immediately after a deployment, they're thinking about all the other things that they can go launch and go do and go change. Because that's really what they felt like they had to do this project to get replatformed, to get onto a modern stack, to now be in the cloud. So now they're thinking very rapidly about some of those other modernization initiatives that they can go do that will drive business value for their caseworkers, for their operations, for their clients and customers that they serve and support. So for me, that's been very unique around this experience. It's so soon after a deployment to see the client ready to go launch on those things because they've had this pent-up demand for so long. And the fact that through the approach that we took and the process that we took to get them replatformed, and because that scale of change for their organization was not dramatic, I mean, it was dramatic in terms of the technology, but from a business standpoint and a usability standpoint, if you're a caseworker in Tennessee, you're still performing the same functions. Like I said, batch is still kind of operating in the same way as it was in the legacy world, but now they're thinking about how to make those changes that will actually optimize and be efficient for their caseworkers into the future. So it's really exciting to see the client at that stage because that's really where the rubber hits the road for them from a business operations standpoint. So why don't we open it up to any kind of questions or comments. Happy to take anything from you all around kind of the journey we went through. It can be around kind of the application refactoring approach. It can be around the decision to go cloud and why it took as long as it did to go to cloud. Yeah. But you know, in terms of success, it's been a lot of fun.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll talk about the cutover one first. I didn't hear the first part of the question. I don't know.
First part of the question was about the refactoring process. The business rule extraction.
Oh, okay. Yes, so actually that's a really good point around business rule extraction because one of the things the client is now looking, like I said, they're still kind of operating this legacy system that's been replatformed, operating it the way they had been operating it. But business rules was one of the reasons why they made that decision because those rules had been optimized, they had confidence in them, but they're still all in the code, right? And one of the things that they want to be able to do into the future is take those business rules, extract them out of the code, and have greater maintainability in a proper rules engine. That's more of a kind of business change and infrastructure change to the application that will have benefits down the road, but it's one of the modernization initiatives that they're talking about. So right now, those business rules were not extracted out of the code into a rules engine. They are still residing in code, but it's not the long-term vision of what the client wants in terms of the application architecture into the future. So hopefully that answers that question. In terms of deployment, because it was a automated replatforming type of project, it was a big bang deployment. We had a pilot phase of the project that followed our user acceptance test phase That pilot was effectively a conference room pilot. It was a mock pilot. It was not a production pilot. So most of the human services systems, when we turn them on, we would have a pilot phase as we're transitioning and do that data migration and data conversion activities. Because of the risk profile of the particular project and the client preference was to go big bang and deploy it in full to the statewide population. And like I said, we leveraged the 4th of July holiday weekend to do that cutover. And I think they were down for one additional business day during the cutover weekend. But that was the approach that we took.
Yeah.
So CAGen, they have an object library, an encyclopedia of objects. Those are the objects that CAGen, as a COBOL generating tool, uses to deploy COBOL. We have, through these replatforming tools, the ability to take COBOL and migrate it to Java. But on this project, the tools were expanded to be able to take the CAGen objects themselves and generate and migrate to Java on the back end. So it's not a straight kind of COBOL to Java, but it's the CAGen objects from the encyclopedia that go through the tooling and generates Java code. I think that's going to require somebody that has a greater level of expertise than I do on that. But sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Thor. Okay. Yeah, why don't we take that one offline after the meeting, because from a tooling standpoint, the objects themselves and the content of the objects was used, but I'll let Thorsten handle that conversation later, because he has more expertise than I do on that topic. Any other questions or comments?
Good question. The question was, mainframes are very reliable, and what is our experience now in AWS? I feel it's just as reliable. I do. The capabilities of AWS, spanning multiple regions and multiple availability zones, I feel it's just as reliable. Since our go live on July 4th, we did experience some issues, but they were core AWS services that had issues, and that we all deal with that, and anyone that lives in AWS. So for our particular region, yes, we dealt with some issues of some AWS services that had some impact. So yes, so since we've gone live, we've had, as far as AWS impact, we've had 30 minutes of downtime. So it's, in my opinion, just as reliable. In some cases, more.
Yeah. So the testing approach, we go kind of traditional SDLC testing approaches: a unit test phase, a system test phase, system integration test phase, a user acceptance test phase. And I mentioned on this one, we had effectively a model office pilot, conference room pilot phase as well. So testing was probably one of the kind of most labor-intensive aspects of this, because we also worked a lot with our business partners on the client side to support them to execute their testing. So testing planning started from day one of the project between our team and also the client team, thinking about how they're going to validate. So one of the aspects of child support systems that are probably the most complex historically are the financial calculations, the financial processing. And that's typically where long-term kind of agency clients are going to focus on when it comes to testing, because it's the highest risk when you deploy a new solution. getting the dollars right, making sure the calculations are correct around what the debt is, how you apply payments. That aspect and that focus of that aspect of the system tends to be what drives a lot of the angst during the project around testing. We also leveraged some testing tools that allowed us to kind of automate and validate. And those come kind of standard through the toolkit that we have, because part of the goal through the testing process is to make sure that whatever the legacy system results would be for the same business process, the same business scenario, the same execution is generated in the new replatform code. So basically, if the financial calculation is $115 in one, it should be $115 in the other one. So the comparison of that process over time is just to make sure we get one-to-one correct. And a lot of times, even during the project, there might be a difference that we found where we actually found a defect in the legacy software, where the client would look at the new results and say, actually, that's more accurate. So there's some strange things that happen with some rounding. DB2 in the mainframe operates a little bit differently than DB2 in Linux, so there were some differences like that. But there were some times and instances in the project where, we obviously found defects in the tooling where we had to go through and remedy those to get the exact result. But there were also some instances where the result that we got in the tool actually corrected, and the results in the new system corrected a long-time defect in the legacy system.
I'll add something very quickly to that. One thing we discovered during testing was insufficient bandwidth at our state offices. So we initiated a statewide network bandwidth upgrade effort, because during those initial tests, it was coming back, TSYS is slow, TSYS is slow. Well, why can it be slow? But when we went and looked at the bandwidth that was currently at the state of Tennessee offices, they were low, very low numbers of 4 and 8 megs. It was very, very slow. So we are actually currently, aside from the child support offices, we are upgrading the network bandwidth across the state. So this is what we're learning on our modernization journey, is that we are pushing more data in and out. So that was a big lesson learned.
Yeah, and the other piece, just to add on around testing, the big aspect of the project as well was really around performance testing, how the system would perform. So from an online standpoint, we saw very good results early on, but really we had to tune batch execution to make sure that we got the same result and the same performance level, so that these legacy child support systems, the way they process, a lot of their functions are processed in batch. They queue their data transactions during the day, they're queued at night, they're processed at night, new workload generated for the caseworkers following batch. The important thing is to be able to get those executions done correctly, to be able to get those flow of the 70 interface partners done and processed correctly. So there was a heavy emphasis around performance testing and tuning during the project. Yeah, so the JCL gets converted one for one. So the JCL still runs. Navneet, you might want to be able to answer that question.
Yeah, running CA, JCL conversion, running CA Atomic, those same jobs, just converted using that refactor code. Yeah.
Sure.
Please. We have OpenShift in our enterprise service bus VPC. So yes, we have some other modernization projects happening right now where we are looking to go to use containerization. So yes, we're on that journey. We're not there yet. This was the first big step, right? Getting off the mainframe to AWS, and now with the modular way that we built it out, we can definitely take that approach. So yes, we are thinking about that. Yeah, we are, like I said, we're running OpenShift right now. So we're experimenting.
And what's the current status on the mainframe? I know they still have certain
Yes, yes.
jobs that are still on the mainframe, but at some point in time, those will be
Yes,
completely
yeah, we are in that process of fully decommissioning other lingering pieces of the mainframe, and we have some other bread and butter applications for the department that are running on the mainframe that will migrate by 2023. So that's where we are. The IBM VPN Tunnel, yes. So it was several hours, but we made it work. So that's how we were able to do it. Sure, yeah. We had two paths actually. So I won't go back to that slide, but we had the direct connect from the state of Tennessee. So the mainframe, the IBM Boulder location already had a connection to the state of Tennessee. So it could route from Boulder through the state of Tennessee over the direct connect to AWS. That's one path. That's more hops. Or we had that direct VPN tunnel from IBM to AWS. So we had two paths to make it happen.
So one other piece that I failed to mention around testing earlier that I wanted to touch on, and it happened very early on in the project, so it's actually slipped my mind when you asked the testing question. We had a very initial phase of the project called the initial component build. What we took was a subset of online, and we took probably the most complex federal report that the client is required to provide annually to the Federal Office of Child Support, and we compartmentalized that into a delivery exercise. So effectively, it was a pilot before we even got to unit testing of the system as a whole. But that initial component build also had effectively a mini user acceptance testing activity to it, because the client team would come in and they would validate that that subset of functionality was working as designed and getting that one-to-one functional equivalence. And I actually think that that was one of the keys to the success on the user side, on the business and program side, because they were getting their hands dirty early on in the project, looking at the results and seeing that one-to-one equivalence. So you were getting some buy-in from the user community. So they kind of went away from the project at that point in time, but they went away confident that what they saw was working. So I thought that was really an interesting approach that we were able to do through a refactoring approach to a project that you wouldn't be able to do with a new system, really with a new system build or even a transfer system type of concept. So I thought that was some positive. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm sure there may be other people in our organization that have been in touch with those other states. But yes, over the last 2 years, yes, I've heard about conversations with other states, absolutely, yes.
Well,
Well, maybe John knows.
well, in the child support community, there are a number of CA-Gen states that run CA-Gen legacy systems. So what happened in the 90s when these systems were built, there were a lot of transfer systems that were gone. So there's kind of a string of states that use this legacy CA-Gen product. So I know like Missouri is another state that has a legacy CA-Gen child support application. I'm sure they would be interested. I think the state of Kansas has embarked on a project. I think they're a CA-Gen state. So there are a number of other state agencies, I think, that it would look at the CA-Gen component. But there are other, even outside of child support, where this, to my knowledge, I think was the first CA-Gen automated migration that had occurred. And so I think there are other entities, whether it's in commercial industries or even in government, that would leverage CA-Gen that would be looking at what state of Tennessee did. One individual that we want to give credit to as well is Wayne Glaus. So Wayne is the CIO for the Department of Human Services. He's also the CIO for Children's Services with the client. Very hands-on in the delivery of this project, but also understood kind of the value that was going to be brought by delivering a replatformed approach to this. And he's actually someone who has talked to a number of other prospective clients that are interested in how this worked. And a lot of times the questions that are coming up are really around the transition of their human capital, of their human resources that support their legacy technology, and how to migrate them into the new technology stack, into the new tools, and have them be productive. So I mentioned that one of the benefits here was we didn't have a lot of end user training that was required through this, because the system really kind of functions the way it used to, but it's on the new technology stack. But on the technology support side, there is user training, there is knowledge transfer, there is kind of shoulder to shoulder and shadowing that occurs to help those technology resources that we're used to working in the CA Gen world come over into the new Java world.
Most challenging, good question, is the most challenging part of the project. Most challenging would be the data migration. And I just thought of another one. The network bandwidth was a surprise. You know, we have been a mainframe shop for so many years. Those bandwidth that was set for those state of Tennessee sites have been that way for so long. That came as a little bit of a surprise, but we were able to recover from it. But yes, data migration and the bandwidth.
Yeah, I think data plays into it as well. I mean, just around these legacy environments, you look at the controls that are in the legacy systems, it does allow for, you know, it doesn't have the same kind of consistency as maybe modern applications would have. So we tend to find a lot more data anomalies. So we find that in the conversion process as we then go to execute. You find that, you know, you get a program a bend, so you think, oh, the program's not working. Well, no, it's actually, there's a piece of data that's not in the form that it should be in, and the legacy system didn't have the controls to catch it at the point of data entry, and it trips us up in testing. So you show up and you say, well, we had these programs fail. Well, the reason they failed is because they're basically working as designed. I mean, you're getting the one-to-one equivalence. That same data transaction would have failed in the legacy system as well. So that's probably where you see the bumps in the road, and making sure you can kind of continue to have progress and find and fix the items that you need to find and fix. But some of those come on the data side, not on the actual application code side. Yep.
Yes, the question is, are the real life cost savings for this migration to the cloud? Yes, there are cost savings, but as John mentioned earlier, we don't like to lead the discussion with that. But as I said, we're still in the process of decommissioning, what's on the mainframe. But are there real life cost savings? Yes, there are. We do see some of those. We're going to see even more of those as we modernize and more of those other human services applications join this AWS tenant. Because I should bring it back up, but the perimeter VPCs, we're going to reuse the enterprise service bus, we're going to reuse the identity and the IAM solution. We're going to reuse everything. So in the long haul, yes, we'll have more cost savings, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's still early days. I mentioned effectively, we're not even at the 5-month mark of having
Right.
been live with the solution in production. So the synergies, I think, are still to be captured, or even more synergies to be captured.
True. I'm not prepared to answer that. I'm not. Yeah. Yes. I want to say yes, but like I said, we're still in the process and looking until I look at all the concrete numbers, you know. There's a lot more things to consider now in the cloud, right? From our new partnerships to, those last 3 slides, right, or talk about the crosswalk, right, of what tool was on ZOS, on the mainframe that we're now using in AWS. So there's quite a bit, to tally there. and there's new partnerships and new licensing, and there's a lot more to consider now, being in the cloud. Not that licensing and those other things did not exist in the mainframe, but we're 5 months in, we're still going through it.
It might be a good question for the conference next year, when we come back in 2022.
Sure. There's a question? Yes. Yes. Right. It is something that is supported by the state CIO, so that helps. So that sponsorship at the executive level was already there. I think the most challenging thing was working with the security folks who had the concern, right? Will we be able to meet all of the regulatory controls in going to the cloud? And so we even had several meetings with Deloitte and our security team and our teams internally to make sure that everything was met. So AWS being FedRAMP moderate was a big check mark. That was easy. Okay, check. And it was also, we have FTI data, so we must adhere to the IRS publication 1075. So, and IRS has even began to adopt cloud. So all those things lined up, right? And it really came back to, do we make this initial investment on-prem for additional capability, or let's just go to the cloud? Our strategy already says let's go to the cloud. This project was a good use case for it, and so here we are.
All right, we're up against the top of the hour here, so if there aren't any more questions, we'll say thank you, and I'll say thank you to Anthony for coming up, and this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, it's been a pleasure.